Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Viltrox AF 50mm f2. This is from their Air series. Now, I knew that this was going to be a special lens when I saw the MTF chart, but what really made my jaw drop is when I compared it to my beloved 50mm f1.4 G Master lens, which I'm filming on right now, and I do almost every time. And I compared it first in the center, both lenses at f2, and saw this result. And then when I looked in the corners and saw this result, as I said, my jaw dropped. Now, that's not to say that this little Viltrox is the better lens, far from, but it is shockingly the sharper lens of the two. So that means that we are about to see the best sub $200 performance that we've ever seen on a full frame system. The Viltrox Air 50mm f2 is a stunningly good lens. More on that in just a moment, right after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Fantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.fantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So the first thing I want to clear up as we dive into the build and handling section is there is, yes, an existing 50mm f1.8 lens. It was released about 3+ years ago. Now that lens, it is different in a few ways. It has a metal construction. It did have an aperture ring. Those are both pluses. And it did have a very slightly brighter maximum aperture of f1.8 versus f2. However, it also cost $359, almost double this. It was 22mm longer and weighed 135 grams more. And so outside of the aperture ring, I would say that this is actually the superior lens in every way, despite the much lower price. So yes, it is made out of plastics, but as has been the case with all of these Air series lenses, it doesn't feel cheap in any way. There's a great rigidity to the body. You can try squeezing and everything feels very tough. Feels like the lens that could take some, a little bit of a beating and keep on going. And in fact, I've been using the 20mm f2.8, the first of this series, for years now, traveled with it a number of times. I've never had any issues with it at all. It has actually held up really well so far. And so I'm not put off by the plastics in the construction, because the trade-off for that is obviously you get a lighter lens, which I think we can all appreciate in a series that's called the Air series. So the lens is 65mm in diameter, or 2.55 inches. It's 56.5 millimeters in length, 2.15 inches. As you can see, it makes it an easily palm-sized lens, really quite small and compact, particularly for being a full-frame 50mm lens. It weighs just 205 grams, or 7.23 ounces. And as you can see, the form factor is very, very similar to the three now full-frame Air series lenses, including the 28mm f2.8, the 40mm f2.5, and then this 50mm f2. This is easily, I would say, the sharpest and probably the best of the series thus far. Up front, we have a 58mm front filter thread that is a little bit bigger than the other two, unfortunately. It does come with both a little pouch and then also with the lens hood. Lens hood actually feels pretty decent. It's thicker plastics, and so it doesn't feel cheap in any way. It bayonets into place with good precision, which wasn't true of the early Air series lenses, so it locks in there and it stays there. They've obviously learned their lesson with that. And so overall, build is actually quite nice. Now, features are basically non-existent. You have the manual focus ring, and that's it. So there are no features. There's no aperture ring. There's no AF/MF switch, any function button, nothing like that. This is a basic lens. However, it does have a metal mount. It does have their USB-C port that will allow for very quick and easy firmware updates. It has 9 rounded aperture blades inside, and you can see from this shot, even stopped all the way down to f8 in a real-world shot, you can see specular highlights are nice and round. The minimum focus distance here is 51 centimeters. So there's good and bad in that. Maximum magnification, as you can see here, is 0.11 times. Not particularly good. However, it is improved from the 55 centimeter minimum focus distance of the previous 50 millimeter f1.8, and the maximum magnification level is a little bit higher. Still not quite up to what I would call the standard, the average being about 0.15 times magnification. So at 0.11 times, not quite as good. So I do wish they would start to improve that. That remains kind of a fairly consistent Viltrox weakness with a few exceptions on that. There is no weather sealing in this inexpensive series. However, they do have their HD Nano multi-layer coating on the front element that does help at least there to resist fingerprints and give you a little bit of moisture resistance there. So, I mean, the manual focus ring, it moves well here on Sony, which I'm reviewing here on E-mount. It will come for Z-mount, I suspect, in the future, and we'll see if they bring it to Fuji, even though it's a full-frame lens. But at the least, I think we'll see Z-mount in the future. Here on E-mount, it focuses nicely. The focus ring feels pretty decent, and there's enough damping there that I feel some precision when doing manual focus. And so the price, of course, I haven't heard the final price, but this series has been priced at about $179 in that range. And typically you can get it for a little bit less if you use the discount code that is provided in the actual description down below. So again, no bells and whistles, but I actually find these lenses to be nicely made, and what I love about them is they are so easy to throw into your camera bag. You know, they take up a very small space. They're lightweight, and so, I mean, I feel like I could throw it along and bring it with me. So it means that this lens is going to end up on some trips that a higher end, more expensive, larger aperture 50 millimeter prime is not going to make it for those very reasons. So overall, I'm happy. How about autofocus? We'll start by talking about stills. As has been the case with this series, we have a lead screw type STM focus motor, and really I have zero complaints about autofocus. As you can see here, it is quite quick to focus back and forth, even with major focus shifts like that. The focus motor is very, very quiet. The only sound I hear, even if I put it up near my ear in focus, is if I'm going on and off, you know, half depressing the shutter button, I'll hear a little bit of a click as the aperture blades open and close. But outside of that, I hear almost nothing from the focus motor itself. Very quiet. And so I found it to be, I actually took this lens with me on a trip to Tokyo recently. I was at CP Plus and some other events that I was there for, and I got great street results with it. I found that it worked great just as that, you know, a very discreet, small, lightweight street type lens, just taking pictures out and around. I got great results there. I also found, actually at the Canon booth, they had a group of guys playing basketball. And so I found there that I was able to get, you know, very perfect autofocus on them moving around and playing basketball. And then also in the Sony section, there was some break dancers, street dancers that were there. And once again, I was able to lock on and track them as they spun and gyrated and jumped. And so very, very good for that. Also in the Sony section, they had a cool setup for portraiture, and so I was able to, you know, test somewhat in there, and I got good portrait type results. I mean, focus is, you know, very quick to lock on the eyes, and as we're going to see, it's incredibly sharp, and so it delivered great results even at f2. And so autofocus for stills, zero concerns. How about for video? Actually, it was better than expected for video. First of all, autofocus pulls have been pretty good with this series, and so I wasn't too surprised that they were relatively quick. But what actually did surprise me is two things about that. First of all, as you can see, it feels fairly well damped. It's not just like abrupt back and forth, and helping that a lot is there's actually a really minimal amount of focus breathing here with this lens. Better than what I see with most 50 millimeter lenses. And so it feels more cinematic because there's nothing jarring about the transition from A to B and back. Likewise, for that reason, with my hand test, it's very smooth. It's just kind of transitioning from the hand to the eye and back without any kind of that kind of swaying back and forth, that movement that you see. And so that was great. As you can see here in just this shot of some people walking up an alley in Tokyo, you can see that focus moves along smoothly, no concerns there. Here's another shot on a set, and you can see in this brief clip that just AF is smooth and it's stable in this situation where it should be stable. And for outdoor landscape type shots, this is the Yokohama harbor. I saw really great results, really stable results. And so in other words, autofocus was fantastic. How about image quality? Well, I'll give you an overview here and then we'll dive deep into the image quality and a breakdown at the end of the video. Optical design in this is, it's far more than what you would expect for a sub $200 50mm f2 prime. 13 elements in 9 groups, but 7 of those are exotic elements. 3 extra low dispersion elements, 4 high refractive index elements. And as you can see, the MTF is just stunningly good. It's very close to being a straight line all across at a very high percentage with just a little bit of drop off in the end, I believe in the sagittal plane, but I mean, it's really impressively good. And so what I found is that even shooting on either a 50 or 61 megapixel body, it's just extremely sharp in the real world. This has 0 problems fully resolving the sensor even at f2 of my A7R Mark V. And so, I mean, just incredibly sharp, as we'll see a little bit more in just a moment. Also, distortion is low. There's a tiny bit of pincushion distortion, a -2 to correct. Vignette is not bad, very moderate, a +50 to correct 4, and for being a compact lens, that's actually a nice result. I think it's probably a good thing that they stuck at f2 rather than trying to go to f1.8 with this lens, because it's basically pretty close to perfect wide open. This shot, for example, has 0 correction of any of vignette, and you can see at f2 it looks fine. Likewise, this shot with a lot of straight lines of a cityscape, you can see again, there's no bulge or distortion there, so all of that looks good. Furthermore, the lens is, again, almost perfectly corrected for chromatic aberrations. You can see here that there's basically no longitudinal chromatic aberrations to see. Likewise, in the corner of the frame, no lateral type chromatic aberrations, and that was true on real-world shots as well. The wide open sharpness is just really, really impressive. And so here you can see from my chart, again, this is 61 megapixels, and I'm showing these results at 200% magnification. You can see that it's just excellent sharpness all across the frame. Dead sharp in the center, in the mid frame, and even in the corners. The corners look very sharp and crisp. What's more, I saw a very good consistency in terms of the centering around. So for example, here, if I compare the mid frame on the right with the upper left corner, and I've got the same build there, you can see that there's very little drop off, a surprisingly little amount of drop off from that mid frame result to the corner. And so excellent result there. Stop down and you'll get a very slight contrast boost, as you can see here when stop down. I saw very consistent sharpness for landscape images when you're down to f4, f5.6, f8. Throughout all of those apertures, I mean, the detail you can get is just amazing. There is some diffraction you can start to see at f11 on a high resolution body, and more obviously at f16. Which is, it's not really lens specific, it's what I always see with high resolution bodies. I've been noting for a few years that Viltrox's optical glass has vastly improved. They got a new supplier and their optical glass is just so much better. And so now I find colors to be very good, be it skin tones or be it, shooting out in landscape settings. Just colors are rich, but without being garish in any way. The one area where I think the lens is okay but not exceptional is when it comes to the overall bokeh rendering. And so in some situations, you can see here specular highlights, they look pretty decent. The geometry is not bad across the frame. But what I do find is that there are some situations, if it's a little bit busier in the transition zone, there's a little bit more hard edges than what I like. And so the bokeh mostly doesn't look bad, but I wouldn't call it super soft either. And I'll show you a few images here and let you draw your own conclusions on that. What I also found is that the flare resistance is actually really great from the lens as well. And so that was true, just in regular shots like this. If I pan back and forth across, you can see whether I'm shooting at f2 or shooting at f11, again, it's just really consistent. No veiling, no ghosting. Flare resistance is pretty close to perfect. Again, that's amazing in a lens that is so inexpensive like this one. So that brings me to my conclusion. This is obviously going to be maybe the niftiest of the nifty 50s that I've seen so far. I mean, it really fits that kind of definition of being a lens, that it's inexpensive, small, compact. But what is different here is that typically with the Nifty 50, you're getting a cheap lens, but you're also getting a cheap lens in terms of build quality, and most obviously when it comes to optical performance. That couldn't be further from the truth here. This lens is lightweight, it's inexpensive, it's easy to pack, but it is crazy sharp, and it has great autofocus as well. I think it's an awesome street lens. I liked traveling with it not only because it's small and compact, but you feel a little bit less vulnerable with a sub $200 lens at the front of your camera as opposed to a $1,200 to $1,500 50mm prime. And so it's probably a lens that's going to end up in my pack fairly often if I'm wanting to throw a prime in to augment some other lenses along with me. I've been really impressed with all the APS-C Air Series lenses as well. But because this is full frame, I'm even more impressed by it because full frame is that much harder to engineer for. And to do a small compact lens like this and to do it so well for so little money, kind of boggles my mind. And so as you can tell, I'm giving this a very, very favorable review. Now, if you want more information, you can check out either my text review that's linked in the description down below, or stay tuned right now and we are going to dive into the optical performance a little bit deeper together. Let's take a look.
Okay, we'll start by taking a look at vignette and distortion. You can see a tiny bit of pincushion distortion there and these outer lines here. You can also see that it corrects in a very linear fashion, just a -2 to correct for it, no big deal. Likewise, there is some vignette concentrated in the corners. However, again, it corrected quite easily with a +50. And yes, there will be correction profiles by the time that this goes to retail. You can see a near perfect control of chromatic aberrations in terms of longitudinal style. Tiniest amount of green fringing, but I mean, nothing hardly there at all. Real world shots, I just really didn't see it. Likewise, lateral style chromatic aberrations, pretty much perfect in the transitions from black to white. No issues there at all. Excellent performance. In terms of sharpness, as I've already emphasized, this lens is incredible. So here, this is 200% magnification from a 61 megapixel A7R Mark V and a sub $200 lens. I mean, and look at the contrast and detail there. If we go to the mid frame, I mean, it's just like, it's flawless. And moving down here in all of these zones, like detail and contrast is staying up, just fantastic. And really from here to here, there is a little drop off right in that like final degree, but it's still actually resolving a lot of the fine details there. Really, really impressive. And of course, where it gets really, really impressive was when I compare it to the 50mm f1.4 GM. Both lenses at f2 in the center of the frame. I don't know if you can have any other takeaway than that the Viltrox is every bit as sharp. And if we move out a little ways, you can see in this zone that they're roughly comparable. As we get a little closer to the edge, however, there's just no question that the Viltrox is much, much sharper and producing a better end result. And that's still true up here. I mean, both lenses are great, but the Viltrox is just a little bit greater, and that's pretty mind-blowing. A bit of real-world perspective here at f2. You can see the detail there is just perfect. Likewise, in this portrait shot, also at f2. I mean, just look at how much detail is there. All the texture information on her jacket, here on the motorcycle. I mean, that's just flawless, and that's at f2. With such a sharp lens wide open, there's a little less room for improvement when you stop it down. However, I would say that at f2.8, I see just the dark levels are just a little bit darker there. If we take a look here, for example, I think that there's just the black levels are just a little bit better. And then if we go to this top corner here, and again, this also allows us to look at the centering, you can see that now that sharpness is just reaching a little further up into the corner, and those contrast levels look really fantastic all through here. Very, very impressive end result. Now, I would say from f2.8 to f4, again, there's a tiny bit of improvement. It's a little harder to spot at this point. From f4 to f5.6, I think it would be hard to argue that there's much there to see. We pretty much reached the peak performance even by f4. That'll carry on through f8. By f11, diffraction is starting to soften things a little bit, but more noticeable by f16, though I will point out that even after diffraction takes its chunk out of the performance, it's still as good or better than most lenses that are under $200 at their finest. So as noted, magnification level is not very high, as you can see. However, the lens compensates by being very, very sharp and high contrast up close, and it's also delivering a pretty flat plane of focus to where we've got pretty good detail all across the frame everywhere that we look. Now, when it comes to the bokeh, here looking at the specular highlights, number one, what I like about this image, where I've purposely defocused everything, is the color rendition does look good. And so it is creating a pleasing background. The shape of the specular highlights is really quite good. I mean, it's deforming a little bit towards the edge, but not too badly. Images like this, and frankly, this is a busy subject, and this is in a camera store with a lot of just kind of hard edges. But I'll also point out there is more outlining in this. I certainly think that the G Master, for example, would make this look a whole lot more pleasing to the eye. Situations like this, where it's a little bit less complex background, again, it's not incredibly soft. The bokeh doesn't, that's to me probably my least favorite aspect of the design. But in less challenging situations like this, it's not great, but it's not bad either. And you'll have to decide for yourself whether or not the bokeh pleases your eye. What I think really does stand out to me, though, is just how good Viltrox has gotten with their optical glass in terms of the colors. And so, I mean, this is just a great combination of color and contrast. Its ability to handle these fine details. And again, the blurred out portion isn't amazing, but it's not hideous either. And so the image itself, I think, works and looks good. Colors here, there's a lot of different tonal variations in this, and I think that the colors look really fantastic. This is the Yokohama skyline here at night. This shot on one of the temple compounds there in Tokyo, you can just see the colors are just really rich. Reds look nicely saturated, blues look nicely saturated. Just a really, really pleasing look overall. And finally, I found that the flare resistance was just excellent. Here, the sun is very bright. You might not be able to tell it because it's not ghosting or anything, but it's doing a great job. And then when I just did all of my intentional things, shooting right into the sun at small and then at large apertures, I didn't see anything in terms of flare artifacts. So overall, this lens is extremely impressive optically.
And so as you can see from our optical breakdown, this lens is just stunningly good for the price. And I hope the deep dive has helped you to decide whether or not it's a lens for you. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day and let the light in.